That's the other thing, is finding people who you trust enough to let them do their thing, to be able to say, here's the sonic vibe we're going for. Do what you will to fit within that, right? I always say, I'm like, I'm not a master at those instruments. Like, they are. Let them show what they can do. Like, let them do what they do.
Powered by the Oak Trio. She's an award-winning singer-songwriter, independent female artist, vocal and music producer for Nova Noir Productions. On her Instagram, she's entertainer extraordinaire, EE for short, music artist, and UC Berkeley graduate in economics, not a walk in the park, or across the glade at Cal. But beyond that, she is an incredibly multi-talented individual whose creative ambitions are only matched by her ability to think deeply and speak on a variety of diverse, fascinating, and forward-looking topics. She's also a close friend. Georgann, thanks for joining me for the first few episodes of the podcast.
Thank you for having me. And that was incredibly nice of you to say all those things.
Very easy to write. Of all those credentials, right, and achievements, or even outside of them, like, what are some moments that kind of stand out to you as points in your past, maybe recently or further in the past, where you've really like grown creatively and have been really cool creative challenges to overcome?
My mind is suddenly flooded with so many different things. When I first wanted to be an artist, the first thing you do is, I have to produce music. Well, at the time I was not a music producer. And so I'm like, I need to find a music producer. And so I did. I was connected with Edmund Clare, who I still work with today. And at the time we were working at this one studio in San Mateo, and we just got together and we decided, let's just like work on her. Like, one single was all it was at the time. And that turned into the biggest mess. So here I am, right? I'm like 20 years old at the time, right? Like, stars in my eyes. I'm like, oh my God, I've made it to a studio. Like, the owners are like famous in their own right? Like, I feel like a rock star. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, like, there is so much drama that goes down, and we lose access to the studio. And next thing you know, like, and I haven't finished this single yet, and I'm literally producing my single on the couch of Ed's house. And I'm like, what is going on? And like, you can do, MIDI mock-ups anywhere, right? But in our head, we're like, we have to do vocals, and we don't have access to any studio because we just don't know anyone. There was talk about like partnering with this one studio, and I think it's Sausalito, but then they ended up like closing their doors. Fantasy went out. So it was just like this year of complete uncertainty until like we talked to, at the time, we were hiring Rachel Peter to be our mixing engineer. And we found out that he had like a studio in his backyard, and we're like, hey, can we record vocals in your backyard studio? Which we did, which was fine until we book the studio time and do the vocals. Okay. In my head, I'm like, we're finally done, right? We dropped the hard drive.
So many people are like, that's just such a nightmare scenario. Like, the number of times I've panicked about that, of dropping a hard drive or losing a hard drive or something corrupting. I'm so sorry.
So okay, I've dropped plenty of hard drives in my life. Okay. Like, this was the only time that a hard drive was dropped onto a carpet of all things, and literally lost it.
Just not in the cards that day.
Just gone. So obviously we're kind of like, well, what do we do now? And like, flash forward, I'd literally get like a random text one day from Ed, and it was just a link to a website, and I clicked on it, and it was the Nova Noir landing page, and it had a team, and I was listed under the team as a vocal and music producer. And I messaged him back, and I was like, says I'm a vocal music producer and a top liner for this studio. And he goes, I knew you'd say yes. We open in September.
So just completely thrown, like we were talking about, thrown into the deep end.
Just thrown into the deep end. And it was when we opened that brick and mortar in September at Airship that I finally had access to a studio to start working on my own stuff, which of course is still not done because then there were a million other wrenches that got thrown into things. But
wow.
If you want to talk about like, it makes a good story, you know, he's like, here's some rising action, and then you fail. And we're maybe gonna make it and we fail.
Absolutely. That's
just on and on.
That's
and
a
on.
stack of challenges, right?
Oh yeah. I like to joke that it took, what was it? At the time, I used to say, this project has been 3 years, 2 studios, and 1 global pandemic.
Just a very short list of credentials to go with the album.
Oh yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
So one thing I noticed in that is you described how, you know, you went from basically having studio time to then having to really cobble together like places to record, ways to record, people who were maybe had equipment and stuff like that to help you with that. And so I think based on what I know about music producing, like that work ethic sounds very much like a bedroom producer's work ethic, like a, you know, singer-songwriter at home, just like, okay, we're going to use whatever we have to get this done and call in favors, all of this. But then you made that transition. I know it probably didn't feel quickly at the time, but you made that transition to, you know, paid professional who worked in the studio very quickly, almost unknowingly when it happened, and then kind of, you know, not walking backwards into it, but getting caught off guard by that being the next transition point. Do you think of yourself as a bedroom producer, or do you think of yourself as a professional producer? Or like what elements of both kind of stick out in terms of how you think about your own production process and work ethic?
I do think of myself as a professional because I spent so long working at Airship, like with my colleagues in a professional setting. And the quality is that I think that one of the things that I hate to admit it, is that anyone can be a bedroom producer. Like anyone can open up GarageBand on their laptops and start doing it, and they'll call themselves a music producer, which is just honestly kind of annoying because it undermines the rest of us who are talented. And there are plenty of people who don't have access to professional studios who are very talented producers, right? So I don't like to use bedroom producer, just in part because there's kind of a stigma around it as not being professional and not putting out good work.
Interesting.
But then on top of it, like I know that right now I've been working remotely, but you know, even when we do bring in the session players to record and everything, like we're in a professional studio environment. So I am a professional.
Absolutely. I think one of the reasons I asked is I know that, like you said, there are kind of stigmas attached or preconceptions about what it means to be a bedroom producer and what it means to, you know, work solely from home off of a laptop or something like that versus, you know, learning how to maneuver and, you know, incorporate into the larger pipeline that typically happens in a bigger studio. Like what would you say are some of the big differences between maybe somebody who works at home versus working in a big studio, working with session musicians and artists?
My gut, like my first thing would be the collaboration that happens when you're working with other people and working with session players. I've been working from home and I really miss the collaboration. And we kind of get that when I Skype in, like in this month, I'm doing a session remotely, and the studio, like the session players are flying into the studio, and I'm going to Skype in and they're going to put my face up on a big TV. It's this whole deal, and they like pipe my voice into everyone's headphones. But and then I
kind of
sit
big
here.
Sister, like looking over the session, directing.
You know, it's fine when it's the vocalist because they're in the booth anyway, and they're used to just being by themselves, people talking into their headphones, right? But it's the collaboration of it all. There's something really electric when everyone is together and everyone's just pinned and on whatever the heck they're working on. Like, I remember the first time I did a session with all the session players was in the summer of 2019, which my client literally just reminded me is almost 4 years ago. Thank you.
It's a terrifying thought.
I know. But it was such a cool experience because at the time we had a big live room. It was kind of a cool setup. Our like studio was above the live room with a window. It was really quite atmospheric. And so we hired the drummer, the bassist, and the guitarist all on the same day. And we stuck them all down in the live room. And we recorded them all simultaneously. And honestly, I'm not a fan now. I'm not really a fan of recording the guitarist on the same day because I like to kind of really give the guitarist my full attention and we come up with new, riffs and things with the guitar. And there's just too much to think about when I'm focusing on 3 musicians and it's been like 9 hours and I have a headache,
Just a short session, a short day.
It's just too much at that point. Oh, my days were like 14-hour days at the studio. The client isn't there for that, but I'm there for that.
Sounds like restaurant industry hours.
It's tiring. And like I was in school at that time too. So
wow.
Yeah, that was fun. That's a whole story.
Okay. I have a question for you for that afterwards.
Sure. But I love recording bass and drums simultaneously in the room together because the two of them end up locking in with each other and they start playing off of each other and you get really good takes when you do that. And we kind of have our go-to session players. Like we exclusively use Orion Salazar, who is actually from Third Eye Blind. So that's my little fun fact. So I love using Orion. He's so incredibly musical. Like he's the most musical bassist I've ever encountered. And then we actually have 2 drummers, but on like this next project we're using Javier Torres, who is super, super talented. And the 2 of them get along, which is great because they have chemistry when they're recording together. And so our tracks, they have that. So whenever I'm editing, I always make sure that the takes line up.
Okay.
So that I make sure, because usually you can just tell that's like, oh, they were really in lockstep together here, which is good. And honestly, I have like barely any editing to do whenever I'm working with Orion because he's very particular and he comes upstairs and he's like, I think that the third take we need to he'll like do his own comp right there. And I'm like, thank God I don't have to do that later.
So it sounds like having the ability to be in the room with artists and those players early in the process can not only like save you a ton of time down the road, but it also sets a really good seed for how the project or how the song is going to progress as it moves through all the stages of production. Is that true? Like that sounds like what you're saying.
Yeah. Although recording day kind of happens at the midway point because there's a lot of pre-production before we go into the studio. But even the pre-production, I've done various iterations of how that process goes. When we were all at Airship, it was me and Ed in the same room together, working with the client in the same room. And the sound quality, so I have one client who we did 1 EP together, and we've now done 1 EP in COVID. And the sound quality on the 2 tracks is different. And I think it's because of the collaboration process. When we did the first 4 set of songs, there were 3 of us in the same room and we're all throwing ideas out and we're just doing it all right there together, right? Now, when we do her things, like she sends me an acoustic track that's literally just recorded on her phone, like a voice memo. And then I kind of go, okay, I know what music she likes. I know what music kind of she wants to sound like. And then I go, okay, how would I do this now? Right. And then I like make the track and like it even has like my voice on it and I'm playing guitar on it and I'll start programming my own drums. I'm not a drummer, but I do like them a lot. So I'll like make these demos and then I send them to Ed and then Ed goes, okay, so she gave me like this outline. Let me add all the frills on top of it because he's really good at just adding all that extra candy on top of things.
Okay.
So like I let him do that, and then we send it back to the client for input, and she's never really given us anything besides that's fantastic. But
Okay.
but I know that it sounds different. And there's this little part of me that's like, I don't know if it sounds different because of our creative process or if like all of our tastes have changed, because we all kind of agree. What's weird is that like, although it's different and the creative process is different, we all feel like we kind of found her sound a bit more. So I don't know if it's just time or the creative process, but it all feels very different. And it's a lot slower this way too. But
Right. Being remote, passing files around digitally.
When we did the first 3 songs, we did all 4 demos in 2 days, back to back. Wow. We did 2 songs a day. We just banged it out in like 8 hours. We were done.
Wow.
Right? We recorded session players the next month, and we were done with that project. Like the whole thing from start to end took us 2 months, which is insanely fast compared to now in COVID, because now it's like, it'll take me like a week to make a demo just because of like, for me also, I'm still learning the software and everything. I'm not as versed in it as my colleagues, right? So it's like, I do this and then I send it over here, and then they don't open that file for 3 days because they're working on something else. And it's just like the focus. Ed keeps calling me and he's like, what do you think about flying out for like a week and we just schedule everything in a week time and you just stay in the spare bedroom? And I'm like, honestly, at this point, that's starting to look like a good idea.
Absolutely. I feel like with making music or with any creative endeavor, there's definitely something to be said about like being present in the process and being truly in the room, right? And beyond just physically being in the room, because I've had instances I know where I have been checked out but physically present in a place, but also I've worked with people in the past who have, they've been there but they're not there, right?
Yeah.
And it seems like, and tell me if this is accurate or inaccurate.
Okay.
A lot of what you're saying sounds like, a lot of the benefit of being in the room with artists while you're working is that the chances of them being present are a lot higher, and there's just a shorter loop of, hey, let's try this, as opposed to having to record it, export it, send it, wait for feedback, get it in a medium that is maybe not as conducive to quickly just iterating. And so things feel maybe a little bit more polished than they should at that stage, right? Would you say that's kind of hitting the mark?
I'd say that in part that's true, but also just like when you're together, you're kind of feeding off of each other's energy. So there's also like this excitement about it that kind of just keeps you going. But I do agree that you are kind of bouncing ideas off each other. So it's more like, oh, you had this idea. Well, what if we do this? And you just implement it right away and go, oh, yeah, it worked. Or maybe, So like, yes, but then there's also more to it, which is just having other people in the room with all the intent of, and everyone has the same intention of like, let's make a song. Everyone's all in, and then you're all feeding off of each other's energy. Like I would have a really hard time working 14 hours by myself on anything. Cause at some point I would just be like sitting there, just like staring out the window, like there's a leaf,
Yeah, absolutely. So then what are some things that you think make for a good energy in a studio session like that? Physically and maybe even remotely too. Like what are some things that really set the stage properly for that?
That's a good question. One I haven't given a lot of thought to. I would say that just one, if you have good chemistry with so in a studio setting, if you have good chemistry with the people, that's honestly one of the biggest hurdles to get over, is that, you just work better with some people than others. I've worked with a lot of guitarists, and while they've all been very, very talented, I have one session player who I always insist on calling first, just because, and I have nothing against the other guys. It's just that like he and I get each other. And so we work really well together, and we can communicate in few words and get really good takes. Right. And so I think that that's really helpful. Just the chemistry you have with people. And there is something to note here that you can like someone and not have good chemistry with them musically. And that is perfectly fine. Like if I'm saying like, oh, the music isn't working out, that doesn't mean that like I dislike you as a person. Cause like I know people and like we know each other. We'll go to a party and have a good conversation with each other, but like we just don't gel when we're making music. And like that's fine. And that's important to recognize.
Sure.
Right. I mean, obviously you don't want to work with someone who you're like, I can't stand just being in the same room as them, right? Like you don't want to work with those people. And I have not encountered anyone like that, thank God, right? But there are just like some people that you just gel with when you're making music better than others. And I think that it's important to just shop around until you find those people, you find your go-to people.
This is a question that you completely opt to not answer because I realize it's a tricky one. What are some indicators to you that you gel with somebody musically? Like, what do you look for in those interactions?
You know, that's a hard one to describe. You know, when you meet someone at a party and you're like, wow, we really hit it off. And you can't really say why you hit it off. You just know that you did. That's how it is musically. Like, I remember literally the day before, 2 days before lockdown in California. Okay. We were recording one of my songs, and like midway through the day, I was like, oh, we really need a guitarist for like these 2 songs. And Rayto was like, I'm gonna hire. He's like, I don't know if our usual people are available. I know that this other guy, Isaac, he might be free, and he's in a band. And I was like, sure, we have the studio booked. Like, call him, right? Talk to him. He comes in. I've never met this person in my life. And he like takes out his guitar. And I had given him the demos the week before. He takes out his guitar and like the song's just kind of playing. And he started just like playing something that I really liked. And I go, that sounds great. We should I was like, I know that like that wasn't on the demo, but that sounds great. We need to record that. And he and I just like, we were like mind melding. We're just looking at each other like, And like, it was funny because Rito and Ed weren't on the same page.
Okay.
They're kind of just like, they're watching this go down. Right. And so I don't really know if they quite understand why I always now insist on this one particular guitarist, but it's just kind of like, we get each other and I can say, hey, how about, and I'll just give the most like brief or the most random description. You know how we all are. We're like, what if it's like shimmery? And there's no professional talk like, oh, I think we need to add some sawtooth. Like, no, we need a more square wave sound. No, I'm like, how about like bubbles, And he's like, I got you. Right. Yeah. So he and I just, we have musical chemistry. I don't know how else to say it.
I feel like that's such a great answer to that question. Like the analogy of meeting somebody at a party and having a conversation and just having an intuitive sense of, oh, I've clicked with this person in some way, and trusting your intuition enough to know that that is something worth exploring creatively is, I think, such a skill. And it sounds like you've really developed that for connecting with other artists and session players and producers and just other creatives and being like, you know what, like I can't articulate it with words, but speaking musically or speaking in whatever creative medium you guys are working in, like that connection is not something you should ignore. And it sounds like you really sharpened that ability. So I think that was a great answer.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I wholeheartedly believe it. And it's, you recognize it when it's in front of you.
It's one of those intangible things of being an artist in a lot of forms, right? Is being able to trust your gut on something without necessarily having the words to describe it. And I feel like that's something where a lot of creators maybe find themselves getting trapped or kind of painted into a corner where it's like, well, because so much of what we do today is how do you quantify it, right? With posting on social media and trying to handle kind of the more left brain side of being an artist and posting and getting a fan base and all this stuff and sharing your work with the world. It's rewarded to be able to quantify stuff in that domain.
Mhm.
But then when you step into the process, especially early on, like talking about pre-production, talking about seeding ideas, talking about locking in and not being able to exactly articulate how, but for everybody that's in the room, being able to sit there and go, no, like that was something special that we could not replicate on demand,
Mhm.
right? The interview with Rick Rubin that I shared a few weeks back or like a week ago, that I'm realizing that this is probably just a restatement of that, which is, you want to set the stage and then just be ready to hit record when the magic happens, and the magic being that intangible element, right? So it's really cool to hear you describe that, how you get a sense for that, and kind of the point at which it goes from this is a good, we'll meet this person to, oh, this is somebody who I can speak in abstract terms to, and they'll understand what I'm saying, or they'll take it and run with it in a constructive way.
That's the other thing, is finding people who you trust enough to let them do their thing and not feel like you have to micromanage them to get what you want at the end of the day. To be able to say, like, here's the sonic vibe we're going for. Do what you will to fit within that, right? Like, I really lean heavily on trusting my session players. Like, yes, the demos are flushed out, but I want them to come up with their own fills, I want them to use their own, musicality and all that, because I always say, I'm like, I'm not a master at those instruments. Like, they need to, like, do it. Let them show what they can do. Like, let them do what they do.
Absolutely. That, I think you've articulated it so clearly in saying, trust your players, trust your collaborators, and within, like I think you said, within some parameters, but really just going, okay, here's the bullet list guidelines. Go play, right?
Yeah.
That's something that really makes the process special and can make it special, especially when you're collaborating with people who really know their craft and who can really steer things in a direction and go, how's this? Okay, this is closer. Okay, cool. Now we're, and then something really special comes out of it of, oh yeah, we didn't know this was going to emerge, but it did. And we're all very happy that it did, right? We've explored our way into this.
There have literally been times when we're like, we'll let Rato fix it in mixing. You're like,
yeah.
Just,
Yeah. And I feel like those imperfections aren't actually imperfections a lot of the time. They're landmarks of going, no, this is part of the journey too. Sometimes on the track to exploring a really good idea, you're going to step in some mud, right? And that's okay. That's part of it.
I mean, I have so many examples of that, both like musically, where like a mistake happened. Next thing you know, we're like, oh, we're gonna write the whole rest of the song is gonna be around this. I have so many DJ cuts that have now evolved into my own songs because I'm like, oh my God, we can have like a moment here. And it was because like the repeat thing kicked in and it like didn't play. And I was like, oh, what if there's It's funny how that works. And then what you're saying about the imperfections, I love to preach that when I am doing any sort of vocals. Like, you can sing pretty, but it's those moments where it's like the little tremble in the voice or the gravel that came out here. That's what feels emotive and what feels real. And I think that's the whole point of making art, is trying to be real and true to whatever artistic expression you're trying to portray. So when it comes to vocals, you're trying to portray an emotion. And the best way to do that is to actually feel. And when you do that, like, you're not going to be perfect.
I love that. I'd have nothing to add. That is, yeah, wow. So I guess my follow-up question to that is, how do you go about exploring some of those emotions in your own process? Or how do you go about poking at that authenticity when you're working on your own stuff or when you're working with an artist? And maybe that's two separate questions.
Those are definitely two separate questions. I'll start out by saying it's a lot easier when I'm working on other people's stuff because it's not close to me. You know, at that point, I'm just trying to I understand like the vibe. And I'm like, we're going to make a cool song now. That's kind of how I am. And then when I'm vocal coaching, when I'm like recording vocals in the booth and it's the artist who's singing, I'm just trying to get the most. I literally will sit there and I'll make them do it until I go, oh, you're making my heart sing. And I'm like, that's the one. That's the take. You know, I'm definitely very feeling. When it comes to my own stuff, I never start out recording. It's just me and my guitar and whatever the heck I'm feeling. And it's literally just like strum, 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 strum. And all of a sudden it's just like, here's a top line. And it's weird. I love songwriting. I think that is the most, it's going to be very controversial. For me, I think that songwriting is one of the most magical things that can happen in the creative process. I really feel like that is where the creativity begins. For me, I always start off with just vocal guitar, right?
Okay.
And when I do music production, I get into arguments, not like heated ones, but like definitely discussions. But like Ed is like production is songwriting, and to me, I'm like it's production. We're taking tools and we're using our tools to like build the house, you know? Like we know we're going to need wood and we know we're going to need doors and nails and all this stuff, right? And like songwriting is like coming up with what it's going to look like for the first time. And that's literally pulling something out of thin air.
Yeah.
And so that's why I feel like that's the most authentic part of the songwriting process. I think that is really the antithesis of what songwriting is when it's just born out of something. And again, for me, it's always just like on the guitar with just me top lining over it. So there's nothing else added to it.
Yeah. Making something from nothing.
Yeah. I really feel like it's just pulling something out of thin air. I really feel like it's that. And when you're talking about trying to be authentic and real, it made me think of how I used to have this like saying that I had on a sticky note posted to my wall, which was that you train with craft and you write with emotion. And what I mean by that is that if you've ever taken a songwriting course, they like to tell you all the things to make your songwriting better. And it will make your songwriting better because they tell you, for the beginner songwriters, it's like, could you say it creatively? Do it. Don't say, I rode my bike to school. Mentioned that it was like, your two-wheeled turquoise green freedom machine. I don't know. Right. Like do something like that. Use opposites. Like let's get down boy and turn it up, just things, opposites. Like and that will make your songwriting good. It'll make it a lot better. So I always talk about like, there are these tiers and everyone talks about, you go from like a beginner amateur songwriter who doesn't know all these things. And they are literally just writing whatever the heck they want. And their songs kind of drift and there's no structure. You're like, is there a chorus? Your bridge is like a whole other song that got slammed in here. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
I see these all the time. I used to judge songwriting competitions.
Okay. Yeah.
So like, can you benefit from like being told like all these skills, like structure, rhyming, rhyme schemes, have, variation in your pitch and your rhythm and all that kind of stuff, right? Like that's craft. And that'll take you from being like a beginner songwriter to a good songwriter. And people end up being good songwriters and they stay good songwriters. And there are very successful, good songwriters who make a lot of money being good songwriters. But I I want to add a category of the great songwriters,
Mm,
who are the songwriters that have trained their craft to the point that when they decide to just write from the heart, these skills just kind of techniques just kind of work their way in to the songs that they are writing.
absolutely. I think one of the things that I'm making a connection to here is the idea of putting in your 10,000 hours, which the number itself is maybe called into question a little bit, but the idea of building up a base, having enough practice that you can lean back on your reflexes now of what has just become, I reflexively know to write this way. I reflexively know to use these rhyme schemes if I want to convey this emotion or progress things in this way. Use this structure if I want to tell a story versus using this one if I want to make something really catchy. Not saying those are mutually exclusive, but making those second nature. So then it just becomes, okay, what do I want to say? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I remember going to like a songwriting workshop at one point, and the guy giving the workshop, he had advice that sound advice in its own right, which was the difference between a beginner songwriter and a good songwriter is that a beginner songwriter writes for themselves, and a good songwriter recognizes that they're writing for an audience, right? That's fine if you're trying to write a song that is relatable, right? But then I'm like, but what about like Taylor Swift, who was only writing about what she is experiencing, and the rest of the world absolutely loves that. And I would argue that the reason that they do love that is because it's real and authentic, because she's writing about something personal, but she's also a good songwriter and has trained her craft. So even though she's writing about something super personal, it still does resonate with everyone else.
Yeah. It almost sounds like a cycle where a beginning songwriter, to add to that saying, a beginning songwriter writes for themselves, then has to learn how to write for others. And once they've learned that skill, then they can return to writing for themselves because they will reflexively be writing for others. It will become a habit of just, no, I know it's going to be applicable. I know I can generalize it. Now this is for me too.
Exactly. That is exactly it. Wow. And as a songwriter now, I've written the songs that are like, I'm going to choose one theme, and every single lyric and song is going to refer to this one theme,
Right.
Like I've done that. And now when I write music, I'm like, there are times when I'm looking at something and I'm like, ooh, do I use this really cleverly written line? Or do I use the top line that I originally wrote it with because I feel this? You know what I mean? And recently I've had to learn and just kind of feel comfortable and confident about going, maybe I should use the one that I feel versus this really clever line.
Yeah.
Because this feels like a trick, and this feels like I captured it, Right.
Yeah. Shit. That really gives me some food for thought. Because I think it's in a lot of creative disciplines, not just songwriting, but this is, I think, one area where you and I are musically saying the same thing, but we might come at it from different angles, because I feel the way about producing as it sounds like you do about songwriting, where when I sit down in front of the DAW, I will put sounds together in a way where I'm just kind of pulling an emotion out of the air, because that is my instrument, right? It's like you sitting down with a guitar. That's how I sit down and go, okay,
That's
what am I feeling?
Guitar.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think there's something to be said about the authenticity of sitting down with the instrument or the tool that you know best and just letting something come out and going, okay, I'm just going to get my own preconceptions of this out of the way and just let myself write on the page, get the sound down, play the chords that come to hand or come to mind, paint whatever comes to mind, right? There's just a stream of consciousness, if you will. And I think that what you're saying about doing and sticking with what feels good or what makes you feel, maybe not what makes you feel good, but whatever evokes an emotion. I think that's really sage advice, because so much of what is online is like, here's the right way to do it. Even with some creative stuff, right? Well, here's how you have to record, or here's how you have to write, or here's how you have to edit this, that, the other thing. And there's a place for that. And it, like we've just talked about, it takes you from good, or from beginner to good. But then once you've mastered those fundamentals, or once you certainly have a grasp on them, what it sounds like you're saying is there is an additional level that is kind of a return to home, but it's also stepping up and going, okay, now what's the emotion underlying why I'm doing this?
I think the whole purpose of any form of art, sound design, film, painting, dance, like you name it, I think the purpose of it is to make people feel something. And I think that, unfortunately, there's actually a great deal of artists who don't recognize that.
Mm.
And they're either just going, oh, this makes me feel good, which that's fine. That's fine, right? And then there's the group of people going, I'm going to be famous, which that's its own can of worms,
Sure.
right? I think it's the artists who are like, I feel something, and if I can make it so that this evoke that emotion from everyone, I think that those are the artists who really have nailed something and found something special.
Yeah. I just connecting the dots and filling you in on a little bit of the conversation I had a few days ago with Isaiah. One of the things we spoke about was how, making YouTube videos, right? Isaiah one of the things he does is he makes a lot of videos. And we were talking about content creators on YouTube and how, a lot of the really successful video creators defy the advice of, here's how you grow on YouTube, here's how to make a video, here's how to do this. And one of the things that we landed on was this concept and this idea of authenticity, which I think we're talking about right now too, and also resonance, and creating things that resonate, right, with other people, and being able to tap into literally that idea of, I'm going to create something that resonates within me, and then that, using energy as an example, kind of propagates outwards and creates resonance in other people in the same way, to make it very musical, right? Kind of similar frequencies.
I used to talk about what I called the art of authenticity.
Mm.
And basically the underlying principle that I came up with was, there is only one form of art in this world, and that is the art being authentically yourself and revealing whatever that is to everyone else, no matter what your medium is.
Yeah, the art of authenticity. I love that. That's
the art of authenticity.
Wow.
I remember when I thought of that, I was like walking to go to like teach the salsa class. I was thinking about like all the vocal it's so weird. I did all these, I had a vocal coach for a very long time, and we do all these lessons, and after like a year of technique, it became like performance things. And these performance techniques started to just resonate with me, and I was applying them to my daily life.
Okay.
And I was like, oh my God, I think that there's like some sort of vein of truth under all of this. I remember I'm walking to go teach the salsa class, and I was like, I think there's only one form of art, and that's just being authentically yourself. And I whip out my cell phone, and I literally message him, and I go, the art of authenticity. And then I go, the art of being authentically yourself. And I just like sent that to him. And he was like, oh my God, yes, you figured it out. And I was like, yes.
We have the answers. We're good. Call Sway, call everybody. We got it. Print it.
I literally, by the end of this, when I had to do like the final lecture in my salsa class, I didn't have any more topics. And I was like, what if we did an entire final class talking about the art of authenticity and being authentically yourself. And I did like an hour long, just like lecture in front of the whole class. I remember afterwards, someone came up to me and he goes, "Congratulations, half the class has no idea what you're talking about. And the other half is like having an existential crisis. Congratulations."
Yep. That's the best way to end a class. The last day, it's like, all right, half of you, you're good. You've gotten what you want. This is really just, this is a wrap up. You're checking your phones, you're hanging out, you're enjoying, thinking about what you're going to do with your friends. The other half is like, what is existence? Who am I? What does it mean to be me or be at all? And the fact that this was in a student-run class makes it that much better.
Yeah, exactly. It's a dance class. Think about it. You're learning how to salsa dance.
That might be the best place to get existential crisis from.
I guess the things I did for that salsa class, I'm really upset to learn that they don't do like the lecture anymore. Just really unfortunate because, oh my God, the crazy things that we did. But I remember that I actually got a message from one of my students, like at the start of the next semester. And she was like, "I don't think I ever thanked you for having, she's like, "I don't think I ever thanked you for such a wonderful class." And she goes, "It was so weird and inspiring." And I was like, "This is what I strive for. This is definitely what I strive for." And she goes, "But thank you for encouraging me to be authentically myself because I really needed to hear that. And I've been taking, winter break to really think about what that means."
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God, like this was my own kind of realization that I was just gonna like, here you guys go. But to know that like someone else was also like, oh, I needed to hear this. That was a good feeling.
Yeah. I mean, that there's kind of a meta sense of being authentic in inspiring other people to be authentic. Like,
Right.
If that was resonating with you at the minute, then helping other people arrive at that same conclusion or a similar conclusion that had the same value to them. It's in the same spirit, right? What are some ways that you think people can be their authentic selves in their crafts?
We're gonna pretend like talking about perfecting your craft is not, we're not discussing that because it has its place, but it's not what we're talking about. And I think that the first thing is whatever your medium is. Okay, writing, music, painting, film, whatever it is, photography. What do you feel? What do you feel when you ask yourself, what do I feel when create this piece of art? Right? Like if I take a picture of a sunset, I'm not going to say like, what am I trying to say? No. How do I feel? What does this photograph make me feel? Right? And does it line up with what you were feeling at that time? Right? I think it's about being connected with yourself, which is difficult for some people. Especially when, for example, like I'll write songs if I am struggling emotionally, right? Like that's therapeutic in some ways. Of course, you can also write songs when you're perfectly happy. That's fine. But let's say you're going through it emotionally, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna write a song and it's gonna have that. And I think that for some people that's really scary to show that to the rest of the world, to say like, I'm not okay. And you know that. And you're like, hey world, guess what? I'm not okay. Like, that's not how we're trained to be as humans.
Right.
And there's something very scary about that level of intimacy that you have in your art.
Yeah.
So I think it's all about beginning by feeling connected with yourself, be honest about how you're feeling, and does my art represent what I feel?
I don't think there's anything that's ever going to replace that in the creative process. And I can't think of just right away, I cannot think of anything more valuable to people who encounter that art, whatever it is, than going, you know what, this person is saying something that clearly means something to them, and for that reason it's worth paying attention to. And for the people who it connects with, it's like, whoa, this is a conduit into seeing how somebody else is dealing with this in a way that not only makes me feel something but also validates how I feel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which, yeah, there's so much more in there too. I don't want to just say that that's the only thing to take from that, but yeah,
It makes you feel like art can make you feel like you're not alone. And I think that that's something that's super valuable.
yes. Yeah.
I have experienced it firsthand. You know, like I'm definitely the type of person to take the old boxer reference. I like to keep my fists up to the rest of the world, right? And that's just how I am. But you don't have to do that in art. It defeats the purpose of art.
I'm having an existential crisis right now.
Wonderful. I've done my work then.
No, it's you've given me a lot to think about with that. To go very meta, to go very high level, right? I think one of the big purposes that I see in art of various forms is bringing people together. And I think what you just said about art makes you feel like you're not alone is one of those things that I don't think gets said as often as it should, because it's such a core piece of what it means to create, but also what it means to be part of any piece of art and consuming any piece of art. And even the word consume doesn't seem like it fits this. It's well beyond that, right? It's much more in the realm of connecting with a piece of art, connecting with the person who made it, and connecting with the other people who are also connecting with it, right? Creating almost like a network of individuals who are in some way or another feel moved by what somebody has created.
I think a key thing here is that humans innately want to belong to something.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if there's like a film that just really resonates with you, you're like, oh, someone else is capturing what I'm feeling, right? And it's such a cool experience when you meet other people who have the same just obsession with whatever piece of art that you also love. I remember I was home for the summer one time, and I am obsessed with this one band okay, I'll actually say it. I'm obsessed with BTS. I think that if I actually went on and talked about how they have affected me, it's almost going to be weird.
Okay.
So big fan for more reasons than just like they're, very talented, great dancers, easy on the eyes, like
sure.
way deeper than that. Okay. So I go back to I'm in Bend, Oregon. Okay. If people are like, what music artist do you like? And I'm like, BTS. They're like, who's that? And then I'm like, oh, it's this K-pop idol group. And they're like, they don't even speak English. I'm like, okay, like we're not gonna get into this one,
Sure.
So then I go back to Berkeley, and there was literally like a decal about BTS, and I was like, I'm gonna go to the seminar for that. They have like their like pre-meetings,
like the first
info session.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to the info session, and it was the first time in my life that I was around other people who knew the band and liked the band. And I was just like, oh my God, we can have a conversation about this.
I'm just imagining you walking around the room just, hi, let's be friends. I'm Georgann. Let's be friends. Let's be friends. Do you like dancing? I also do salsa dancing.
Can I add you?
Yeah, but already that's such a great example of art connecting people in a way where you don't have to worry about, are we going to have something to talk about? That base is covered.
Heck yeah, especially when you walk into a room and And like, you are nothing like the other people in the room, right? Like, I can walk into a room and like people will be like super edgy or just like, not academic or like, just like picture anything that's literally opposite who I am and like we'll be like BTS. I'm like BTS. I'm like, okay.
Wow.
You get it, right?
Yeah.
And it goes way further than just like, who's your bias? It goes like so much deeper than that. You're like, what is your favorite song and why? And like, what have they done in your life? Like how have they affected you?
Yeah. I think a lot of people intuitively understand, or they would understand if it was spelled out, that art is a way of connecting people and unifying people and making people feel not alone.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that if people were asked, what's the purpose of art? That would not immediately come to the surface, right? And I think that's an important thing to restate, especially with a lot of the stuff that's going on with tech right now. And you've seen me talking about, AI and all these things. And I think what you are pointing out so clearly is that, one, this is not going to replace that anytime soon. And two, it provides kind of the antithesis of what a lot of people are worried about right now. It's like, oh, well, you're going to be able to print off this, that, or you're going to be able to just press a button and boom. It's like, well, yeah, but that's never been the point.
Yeah. People think that it's entertainment, and there is an entertainment value. Like, is it fun to just like sing at the top of your lungs and jump around? Absolutely. Right. But that's not, but if you were to just distill art down to entertainment, you're really missing so much from what it is.
Yeah.
I knew a person who said, if everyone's suffering how did he phrase it? He said, I would forego all forms of arts in this world, film, television, music, painting, anything, cinema, like photography, right? I would forego all of that if it meant that we could solve all of the world's problems. And I was like, do you realize the can of worms that you would open by taking away people's escapism? Let's not forget that art is a good escapism. Something that they consume daily that brings them pleasure and joy, and something that gives them a sense of belonging. Like, don't distill art down to something that is just so trivial, like, a can opener.
It sounds like that statement, that sentence is a paradox, in that by getting rid of all those things, you would actually create a problem, even though you've eliminated all the rest. It's like, well, wait a second. You are solving one heap of problems and creating another.
We all consume art daily. People act as if art is just kind of unimportant, even though that's the only thing that they listen to the radio and have Spotify playing on their drive to work.
Right.
And then they have the overhead speakers going while they're at work, and then they watch YouTube videos, and then they come home and they watch television, and they're like, oh, art is so dumb. We don't really need it. It's kind of just pointless. I'm like, all right, what are you going to do with your time otherwise then? Oh yeah, you can't read novels either.
I would even take that one step further and say that so much of what people do throughout their day, and so much of how people choose to interact with the world, is itself creative. Like getting dressed to go out in the morning.
I was going to say fashion.
Exactly.
Like, everyone has their own style. What do you think that is? It's expression.
There was a few months ago, and I don't know if you ever saw any of these, but a few months ago, I was kind of diving into this question of, what does it mean to have a creative identity, and what does it mean to have a creative persona and a creative fingerprint? And I did a lot of pretty heady academic reading on this stuff. And, once I cut through the massive thesis statements and reference sheets and all this, the content was really interesting. And one of the things that really stuck out through a lot of the research that I did was that the very act as a human of having an identity and a sense of self is itself a creative act. In that, in order to be able to say, my name is Jameson. I like these things. You are creating not just a profile, but you're creating something that is well beyond what you just do day to day. And then and then because of that, the things that you do day to day are influenced by your sense of identity. So it becomes this self-drawing picture, right? So one of the insights that I took out of that, and one of the things that one of the beautiful things that I think came out of that from my own understanding, is that everybody is creative to some degree. And people who say, oh, I'm not creative, well, maybe you haven't trained it as well. Maybe you haven't developed a craft that allows you to express it as quickly as somebody who can pick up a guitar and just play, and within a few hours can very quickly have, this beautiful expression of how you feel and what you're going through or what you're thinking about. They might not have that, but that's not to say that that cannot be developed. The very act of being is a creative act. And so all of what we do to some degree or another is in itself a little bit creative in some way or another, whether or not we intend it to be.
I can see that as being true. Especially, I think that one of the easier things to point at or point to is, what clothes do you choose to wear?
Yep.
How do I decorate my house?
Yes.
What choice of silverware did I pick? What color are my plates? Just little things like that show some form of preference that's rooted in expression of yourself. And that expression could be, extrapolated into creativity.
I think the way that the mnemonic or the quick little snippet in my head that I keep in mind that quickly allows me to go, oh yeah, that's right. And this and this and this and this is, to create is to be human, and to be human is to create. I think that's a very, it is really a reciprocal relationship like that of, yep. To what degree is a secondary question. That is a core kind of, okay, if we are assuming this is correct, and that means a lot of cool things and can be taken in a lot of directions. And yeah, I really like those examples of, how do you dress? How do you decorate your house? What foods do you like to go eat? What do you cook for yourself, right? How do you, if you're going on a date with somebody or you're taking your friends out to dinner, where do you take them? What do you do? Those are all creative choices. And so it's been interesting after thinking about that and now plugging in what you're saying to that larger thought, to hear people say, oh, I'm not creative, or, oh, I can never create this or that. Well, maybe there's, but maybe you could. And maybe there's some ways that you're already doing it that you're not aware of.
And I do think that some people are better at certain mediums than others.
Yes.
Not everyone's going to be a good dancer because not everyone is as coordinated as other people, that's not your medium. Try something else. I have a friend who's like, oh, I am a terrible singer and I have no sense of rhythm or musicality. And there's a part of me that's like, I'm sure we could train it, but you know what? I will admit you'll probably never be, at the Royal Albert Hall. That's fine. What about other mediums of art, And then let's not forget, because as you were talking about, to be human is to create, and to create is to be human. I was trying to think, there's something about how, what was the first sign of civilization? And the idea was their proof of the first civilization was a healed femur that they found, which signified that someone had a broken leg and that the others took care of it, right? But that also means that it was probably set, which makes me think about how creativity is much more than just art. It's also innovation. And there really is kind of these lines, these, gray areas between what is technology and what is art, to be creative, someone had to think about the first computer and come up with sewing machines and just everything.
Yeah.
That was all born out of innovation, which is in some ways the same thing as being creative.
There's, just to reinforce that, there's the idea of divergent thinking and convergent thinking. Are you familiar with these at all? Okay.
No.
So the super
Say
quick
those terms,
summary.
I go,
Okay.
you
So
were the cognitive science major.
for a little bit, not for long, but the interest stuck around. Divergent thinking is being able to really, for lack of better or more technical words, to explode your thinking in a lot of directions about all of the ways that things could happen or could be used, right? The ideas of kind of lateral thinking and things like this, of going, hey, if I give you a brick, how many ways can you use it? Those are more traditionally divergent thinking examples. Then there's convergent thinking, which is converging on an outcome or a utility or a destination, right? That's quite literally how I remember it. It's convergent thinking is pointing in a direction, going to a destination. You are trying to get something specific. So divergent is exploration. Convergent is picking a destination and going there. And so talking about innovation and what it means to create in maybe less traditionally creative domains. Although if the first example of human civilization was a healed femur, then maybe left-brained or utility creativity is the traditional creativity, and we've got it backwards.
It was just necessary. It was
right.
The necessary one.
Absolutely. But this idea of kind of left-brain creativity versus right-brain creativity, where left-brained is much more quantitative. It's what are we going to fix? How are we going to do it? But approaching that in ways of like, what are some ways that we can do this that we haven't done it before, right? How can we not just redefine the wheel, but go and build something that's not even a wheel at all? Go and build something completely different. And then right-brained creativity is, for lack of a better term, storytelling in my mind, right? Which is, let's take some symbols and let's make some meaning out of them in a way that the symbols by themselves would have no real purpose. They would just be shapes or sounds or whatever. And let's stick those all together in a way that constructs a narrative that takes people on an adventure. There's no point to the adventure necessarily, except for what we assign to it, the value that we assign to it. And so I think, and this is where this becomes a working theory or a working kind of thought that I'm chewing on, like being able to do both of those or being able to appreciate both sides of that coin underpins creativity in a way that I don't hear talked about very often. And I think a lot of other people don't speak about creativity in that same sense. So I'm really interested to explore that more. And I really appreciate all the stuff that you've kind of brought to the conversation about this, of just like, yeah, like here's what connecting is, and here's what it means to be authentic and feel your craft and feel the things that you're producing and connect based on that and how it resonates. So I just wanted to share that because I thought it was very closely related. And in the same way that you've given me a lot to think about, I think that that's a cool way that I'm thinking about it right now, and certainly helps contextualize what it means to be creative, which then feeds back into the top of the equation of, okay, well now how do you go and apply that in whatever you're doing, whatever your medium is?
You're like, here's your existential crisis. Go.
Yeah, you gave me an existential crisis. I feel like I have to at least try to return one.
I love what you said about the storytelling and how you said it's just a bunch of symbols and sounds, because to me, that sounds like language.
Yep.
And I was like,
absolutely.
It's one of those moments when I'm going, what is creativity? And I was like, given everything that you just said, I was like, it sounds like creativity is one of the most, if not the most innate human thing that we possess as a species.
And maybe one of the things that differentiates us from other species.
Now I want to go look at like other species and be like, all right, how are they being creative?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, all right, whales talk and they have their own languages, and my dog has his own body languages, and same with my horses. Like
crows are just waiting in the background, like, hey, when you get to us, you're gonna figure some stuff out. So to kind of bring the conversation a little bit back towards applied creativity and actually getting creative output through a medium, right? You write songs, you play guitar, you dance, you are also writing a more performative piece. I don't want to give that away. On top of, a lot of other things that I just through our friendship, I know you do. Like, how do you wear all those hats? Like, do you see yourself as one specific thing, or is it kind of like, well, today I'm Georgann the songwriter, tomorrow I'm Georgann the producer because I have to be, or is it more like I'm just me and it'll come out through whatever medium it wants? How do you
I love
think
that you're asking me this question.
Okay.
I love this because me, when it's just me, I feel like it's just me. Like, this is what I do. Because the thing is that I've always been this way. I've always been just consumed by the arts in various forms. That's just me. That's just how I am. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I love being able to be involved in multiple creative genres, I'll say, because it keeps it fresh and interesting for me. I'm definitely a person that thrives on just enough chaos. Just enough chaos that I feel like I'm not quite in control. I really do well on that. I really do well with that. Interestingly, and I've thought about this recently, and it's something that I want to change because I realize that when you meet someone and they say, "What do you do?" you try to give them a really, something simple to keep. And in recent years, I realized when people say, "Oh, tell me about yourself," I say, "Oh, well, I am a music and vocal producer." And then they go, "What is that? What is that?" And I say, "I produce the music and I produce the vocals for recording artists. And I take their songs from just stripped how it was written to sounding like it can belong on the radio." Right? That's how I've always been describing myself. And in recent years, I've been like, why am I saying this? Like, I don't really see myself that way. It's just like, that's what I tell people because that's where my money is presently coming from.
Interesting.
Where like, I want to see myself as, when I talk to other people, I want to be like, oh, I'm an artist. I'm a singer, songwriter. But because I'm not at a point where I have the product to be like, go listen to it right the heck now. I've been just kind of downplaying that. And it's something that I've had to kind of think about because I don't want to keep being like that. Because I feel like I'm not being true to myself when I talk to people like that. Right. And so people who I know that I'm going to be seeing more often, or I already have a more kind of intimate relationship with versus just like a random person.
Yeah.
I'll explain that to them more. And it was kind of great because back this last year, I went back to my hometown and I met up with someone who I knew from high school. We're like, let's just get lunch. Like, we haven't talked. Have we even talked? Like, I know we all went to the same high school. Like, let's get lunch, okay? We sit down and we were talking, and I launched into my, music vocal producer, and this person was like, "But what do you do?" And I was like, wow, someone is seeing right through this because they know that I also write and that I also create and that I don't just work for other people. And that was kind of this aha moment for myself where I was like, I need to make a change. And again, that's just how I put myself out there in the world. And so I've made more of an effort to, whenever I talk to people, I'm like, I always say that I work as a music and vocal producer, and I am also a singer-songwriter artist who is working on my own music simultaneously.
Yeah.
So now I've decided to start trying to say that. But if it's just me, I'm like, oh yeah, I do. I'm just me. And I write songs and I write this and I dance over here and it brings me joy. I do things that I enjoy.
Which itself is a good answer, right? And maybe the most authentic answer. But I also can relate to and appreciate that desire to convey value when you introduce yourself. Here's how I'm useful. Here's what I do, right?
Yeah.
Which I also do the same thing, and I am inspired by what you're saying to also change that a little bit, because it's like you said, people can see right through it. It's not it's not an accurate representation of who you are, which I think is what people are really asking when they ask, well, what do you do? Right? Who are you?
They're really trying to say, who is Georgann? They're not saying, how does Georgann make her money? That's a completely different question. But that's not really how we are as a society. If you meet someone, you go, oh, what do you do? And they're always, and like, you always have to get through the usual, like, hi, how are you? I'm well. I'm Georgann. What do you do? And they're like, oh, I'm a doctor. Oh, that's cool. So what do you do outside? And everyone always says, so what do you do outside of work? I was thinking the other day, because, I was reading this stuff about how, like, to live a happy, fulfilled life, you have your job, and then you need to have something that you do outside of your job. And usually it should be something that you're passionate about, like working out is great, but like, join a club, join a dance group, join a workout group, join like a painting club. Like, they were like, you need to have some sort of like passion outside of your work. And I'm like, what if mine are combined? I was like, how am I going to live? How am I going to be an interesting person if my work is all consuming, but like to everyone else, that would be interesting. And then I'm like, oh, it's cool because I have a horse and I also dance. So
I feel like that's a problem that creative people are faced with more frequently. Not just creative people. Everybody has depth that goes well beyond what they do for work. But I think to be a good creative person, especially working in one specific set of media, to explain all of the stuff that you do is to explain what you pull from creatively. And that really is what you do. It's like, well, I dance sometimes, but I get inspired to write songs. Or let me speak from my perspective here. It's like, well, I sometimes make videos, but then I also sometimes read research papers and then write songs about them, and then go and record videos about it, and also post questions on TikTok and ask friends questions that I don't expect them to have an answer to because I don't have an answer to them, and then they answer them. And then sometimes I go and work out, and I see that as like its own form of kind of creating something. And back when I skateboarded, like that, that is art in motion, and it's like dancing or something like that. If you start rambling like that, or maybe rambling is, I'm already indicating that I have a bias towards this by saying it's rambling. If you speak like that, when somebody asks you, what do you do? They're going to back away slowly. Best case. Worst case, it's like, okay, they're calling the police, right? But all of those are the correct answer in a way where, for me, and it sounds like for you, to omit any part of that is like, well, then you don't really know what I do, because all of it contributes to all the things that I'm making. And so to say only one piece of it, it's like, well, I'm not just a producer. I would never be happy as just a producer. So if I tell you that's who I am and you think of me as that, then that's bringing more of that unhappiness into my life, because all people think of me is as a producer.
I frequently run into people not understanding what I do, and they will even be my friends because, like, we went to college at Berkeley. Majority of my friends are software engineers.
Yep.
Right? And so I remember this even happened to me just in the last month. One of my friends was messaging me kind of late, and I was like, I'm going to sign off and go to bed soon because I'm going to.
Yep.
This person was like, I know you well enough to know that you are not going to sleep. And I said, okay, well, I want to be left alone so I can work for the next 2 hours. And he's like, why are you working at midnight? I'm like, I shouldn't have to explain to myself. Like, if I said I was in the office, you'd leave me alone.
Right.
Like, it's just, and like things like that happen all the time. Sometimes I feel like people are like, why are you at the barn with your horse and not like working on whatever? And I'm like, because my life is not 100% working on this project. Like if I worked a 9 to 5, I wouldn't be expected to be working at, 8 o'clock at night. Like I should be allowed to eat dinner, play with my dog,
Sure.
see my horse. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I was talking to my mom about this at one point. She's like, yeah, I think people kind of, see you as almost like realtors. You know how realtors get called at any hour?
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, I kind of feel like that sometimes.
Yeah.
So I've had to, in the last couple months, I've just decided to just be a lot more hardcore with people and be like, I know I'm awake. I'm not answering these messages until tomorrow. I'm going to sit down with my coffee and I will answer them then. Like, just because I am awake, like I shouldn't have to have the excuse of I was asleep to like not deal with your stuff right the heck now.
It feels very similar to people who freelance, right? Because I think the overlap in the problems faced by, well, you set your own hours, right? It's like, yes, but that also means that I'm not accountable to anybody but myself. So I have to be my own manager. I need to, at least this is how I do it. It's like not having a boss or not having a team to hand something into sounds really nice if you're sick of being on a team and having a boss to hand something into. That's not to say that there's not elements to be enjoyed of that, right? Being able to set your own schedule can be a beautiful thing. And it's certainly something I'm very grateful I'm able to do. But also, beneath that, I think a lot of those things people don't realize serve as accountability mechanisms. And when you remove those, it's like, unless you are able to hold yourself accountable, then all of a sudden you have no accountability. And that can be really destructive if you're relying on that accountability to yourself to pay the bills or to do whatever, right? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of this hidden danger that creatives have a lot of the time, maybe less so when they're working on teams, so more so when they're kind of on that rise up to, okay, I have a manager now, I have an agent, I have this, I have people I am accountable to who are relying on me. As to bring it back to the start of the conversation, as maybe a bedroom producer who's looking to make that jump to professional, as a songwriter who's looking to go from novice to experienced. Being able to hold yourself accountable to me, it seems so important. And it seems like the parallels between somebody who is a creative person trying to make something and somebody who's maybe a freelancer who's, maybe only accountable to a client that they've never met, right? And even then, freelancers have it a little bit better because at least they have somebody to go, hey, like you said you'd have this website for me by Tuesday. It's Tuesday. Where's the website? Yeah. If you're working on your own project, the only person, let me rephrase that. If you're working on your own project that only you set the deadlines for, then the only person who's ever going to show up in your inbox going, hey, it's Tuesday, where's the project, is you.
Mm-hmm. I get that 100%. As someone who has a team and has deadlines like this month, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm under deadline, right? You know what got to take a back seat? My own music that doesn't have a deadline because I get to work on it whenever I want, right? I completely understand that. I'm like, no one is saying, okay, give it to me.
Yep.
And I will add that it almost becomes a little bit of a stress because you're like, I have so much to do. Mm-hmm. But this is pressing because it gives me the deadline. I'm like, I almost need like that extra accountability. Mm-hmm. I would argue that almost everyone performs better when there's some sort of structure to it, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you're just working on your own stuff and there's no one else to answer to, it really comes down to like create your schedule. Like tell yourself like, I'm going to get this done by this date, and don't let yourself slide it. I'm completely guilty of sliding dates. It's something I'm working on and will probably continue to work on until I actually have someone who's like, all right, we need album 2. And I'm like, on it, I'll do it, Yep.
I think there's so much value to be gained that a lot of creatives are missing out on because of that lack of structure, and not to the fault of any creator, right? You're not intentionally doing this to yourself, right? You're not intentionally sliding your dates on your projects. It's just that it is, even if it's just slightly below the priority of something that's happening with your team and your day gets filled, well, then just by being logical, right? And making the economical decision of how to use your time, you're prioritizing the thing that takes the top priority.
I was a student trying to also work on my own music, and like you can guess what took the majority of my time.
Mm-hmm.
It was 100% classwork.
Yeah.
Like, what? I'm going to fail my classes? Like, I don't want to do that.
Right. I'm revealing my own kind of biases in this, but one of the things that I attribute to being able to accomplish a lot more in recent history has been having literally accountability partners, like people that I message almost every single day and go, yo, here's what I'm doing today. Here's what I did yesterday. And you've seen some of this with the community, but I don't want to steer the conversation in that direction. I just want to share, it has tremendously helped me to, this is with friends and just people who I go, hey, I'm going to do this thing. And if I don't, just rip me apart for it, because that is what I need. Because if I don't get the stress of that, I will not accomplish this thing that I know, and you probably agree with, is a good thing for me to do. And that, having that, I know that's not for everybody, but it's also like, that has radically transformed my life in the past year or two.
I've only ever done an accountability buddy with a workout partner, and that was it. And that was like 2016.
Okay.
I think that, here's trouble that I run into when I try to find accountability partners. I'm like, hey, do you want to do this accountability thing with me? And then they're like, no, that sounds like way too much.
Mm-hmm.
Because like whatever the heck I'm proposing, they're like, yeah, no.
What do you think are some ways to counteract that? Like, how do you think you could approach that in a way that has a higher success rate?
I just go, well, I guess I'm going to have to hold myself accountable.
It's a good skill to have.
I just go, so terrible. I'm like, well, you're lame. And
I'm going to go do it anyways.
Yeah, that's actually me. I'm like, oh, well, I thought that it would be a lot more fun and a lot easier for me if you were on this journey too, but I guess it'll just be me now. That's 100% how it goes. I wish I could say it wasn't, but that is how it goes. I'm like, well, okay, you're boring. And
and I'm going to check in with you once I've done this thing, and you're going to see how much you missed out on, okay?
Yeah, basically.
Hey, so I want to start steering the conversation to something of a close. I've got two questions that I think actually dovetail really nicely with where we're at. So, of the things that you're working on right now, what are some of the bigger challenges that you're facing, or what are some of the things that you would like to achieve in them?
Okay. I'm working on 3 major projects right now. One of them, I have a team and I have lots of accountability. This is perfect because we were just talking about accountability. What's great is that there are deadlines. The songs are written. We know what we're doing. The challenge here is actually how limited the time frame is, because we want to be done with this project by the end of June. We have to do 8 songs, and I don't think we're going to get done with the first 4 until about March. So that only leaves April, May, and June for mixing, and like half of our team is going to be MIA for 3 weeks. That should be a reasonable time to be able to do things. However, given how slow file sharing is and how people kind of like, I'm also guilty, people will take a couple days before opening files and diving into things. I'm just a little bit, I feel the stress of that because I just want to get it done because I'm really sick of projects dragging on for as long as they have. Our last project ended up being drug out an entire year. Now, to be fair, we had 3 postponed sessions due to someone always having COVID. So like it's reasonable. And then you have to, be like, okay, but when are we available again for studio time? So that's reasonable, but still I'm over it. I want to be done with that, because also as soon as we get done with that, then we get to go into pre-production for the like not theatrical, well, kind of, but like stage, stage presentation and production. So I'm kind of excited about that, but also like I'm very much of the mindset, let's get it done. But the deadlines and how limited our time is kind of stressing me out a little bit. It's going to be a challenge, although I am clearly just like, let's go. And then I have my own album that I'm working on. And what is my challenge there is motivating myself to get it done when I have the other said project kind of pressing on me, especially as a singer. Like, I need days off from singing. And if I'm singing backup vocals and lead vocals on this client's project, like, I can't just turn around the next day and start recording my own. So I have to be, and I know myself that I will beat myself into a pulp. So I have to be very conscious of that and be like, it's okay to take a day off, but that means that my project's going to be drug out. And to be honest, I want to be done because as soon as I'm done, I'm going to I get to move on to the next thing, which is like distribution, promotion. I get to make videos. That sounds amazing. And then like, I also want to move because I have just such a good setup right now that I don't want to uproot myself before I'm done. So I'm just really ready for a change though. So I have that I have to hold myself accountable for. And then my third project, I'm just kind of, is it weird that I'm using my third project as my just like downtime project? I'm like, oh, I think I'm done with music. Let me go like develop this now for the next however many hours I want to spend on it.
Sure.
So I don't really have any deadline on that. It's my passion project. We'll see where it goes. Obviously, I always have the stars in my eyes and I'm like, as soon as I'm done with this, then we can do this and we'll take it all the way over there to the top at the award shows.
Those three projects combined, and any one of them, honestly, is such a reflection of your ambition as a creative person and what you do that, hearing it, I'm like, that's a lot of work. But also in my head, I'm like, that is something that you will very much accomplish.
I appreciate that because there are definitely days when I'm like, I am overwhelmed and I do not want to take another year working on specifically my album. I don't want to take that time anymore. I want to be done. But when you have other things that pay you, it takes a back seat at this moment.
I feel like a lot of creative people can relate to that. Second wrap-up question or ritual question. If you could reach back in time and give a piece of advice, creative or otherwise, to yourself 1 year ago, what piece of advice would it?
That's a good question. I would say over the summer, spend a little bit more time recording your vocals because you're going to have a lot more projects getting thrown at you come fall, and you won't have as much time as you had anticipated to work on your own project. Also, start your vocal training earlier because I was kind of bad about doing my vocal training until around the fall. And it has improved my ability to do backing vocals, which obviously are out of, your comfortable range. That training has really helped my backing vocals. And so I would say, hey, you should probably include vocal technique and exercises into your routine a lot earlier and try to aim for about 3 days a week, just doing that because it's going to help you.
To generalize it, start on your project earlier, use the time that you have, and then sharpen your craft, sharpen for you, your vocals, start training your vocals or commit to them more.
Yeah.
Final question. What are some of the best ways for people to keep up with what you're doing and where can they find you?
My Instagram. Instagram is where I post most of my things. Facebook is just my overflow, and it's just my name, Georgann Ireland. You will know everything about my life. You'll see a lot of stories of my dog and my horse. You'll get a lot of behind the scenes vocal recording. You get to see all the glamour. I kid you not. I cannot tell you how many times I'll get like a message from my mom who's like, "Why did you post that?"
Very much a feed full of portraits of an artist in process.
What I love is that like my feed is like nicer photos, a bit more well thought out. On my story, it's just like, this is what it is.
Perfect. Very candid. Well, Georgann, thank you for sitting down. I loved where our conversation went, and I hope everybody else gets a chance to check out what you're doing and follow all the stuff that you're working on.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure. I'm glad that you asked me to do this.
That is it for this episode of the Create Connected podcast. If you haven't already, go down below and like and subscribe to help others find the show. If you want to continue the discussion about anything that you've just listened to, go ahead and leave a comment down below. I do my best to reply to all of them. Finally, remember that the Create Connected podcast has a companion newsletter. In that newsletter, we talk about standouts and highlights from this episode, actionable tips that you can use to improve your creative process, and a bunch of other cool stuff. Go sign up for free and get the latest episode at createconnected.com. That's it for now. I'll see you next time. Peace.